Welcome, and thank you for joining this session of Innovation Institute 2021. With nearly 50 sessions available through the summer, we know you'll be discovering new skills, strategies, and resources to transform the teaching and learning in your classroom, and we would love to hear from you. If you haven't already done so, please be sure to visit the Town Hall in Attendify to connect with the attendees through the activity stream or community features. If you would like a certificate of attendance for attending this session, you will find the request form linked at the end of the session description in Attendify. Thank you, and enjoy this session from one of our amazing Innovation Institute presenters.
Well, welcome, and thank you for this 11:30 session for joining us with Design Thinking to Inspire Creative Learning for Any Classroom. We're here with Chrissy Van Osdale. She works out in Houston, Texas. She's the Innovation Coordinator at Kincaid Lower School, and she supports kids, teachers from pre-K to 4th grade, and has a makerspace, the Launchpad. She loves incorporating creativity and technology in authentic ways, supporting teachers, and seeing kids experience the true power of global connections. She believes she's been waiting her whole life for creativity to be recognized in school curriculum and wishes she'd had more time in school as a kid to play. She spends every day of her adult life making up for it. In her free time, she loves doodling on her iPad, walking her dog, and taking care of her family. And you can connect with her on Twitter. We'll share that. Within Attendify, if you would use the chat there, because we can all interact pretty easily, seamlessly there in Attendify. You can also click on anyone's profile and read more about them, including Chrissy. So Chrissy, you feel free to share your screen at this time.
Thank you, Jamie. Just getting it up here. Can you see that okay?
Yes, it looks great.
Great. Well, good morning, and thank you for coming. It's always a little strange to be shouting out into my computer and seeing like the participants, count. There's people out there listening, but you don't get that like in-person jazz of energy. So hopefully I'll bring some energy this morning. The Launchpad space that Jamie just mentioned, I am actually in the middle of cleaning right now. And if you've ever worked with any type of activities where kids create things, you know that you end up with a lot of creative debris that you are constantly having to clean, cultivate, change into other things. So I'm excited to pause today and to talk a little bit about design thinking. I just went to Emmanuel and Sadie Lewis's presentation about design thinking, and so many good reminders there about how it's not just an activity, it's really like a way of thinking. So hopefully 30 minutes is not a lot of time, but I included all of the resources in my slides because I wanted you to be able to have some things to take back to your classroom in the fall to get excited about trying design thinking with your students. It's certainly not an activity, but just taking the courage to let them explore. And all of that student agency that AJ Giuliani referred to in his keynote this morning, it absolutely 100% fits in with this type of learning and thinking. So this session is design thinking. There's still time for you to exit Zoom if you're in the wrong place. So when people think of design thinking, a lot of times they think of these standard steps. And these are the steps that were defined by the Stanford D School or Design School. And even the people at Stanford will tell you it doesn't have to be exactly like this. And as Sadie and Manuel pointed out earlier this morning, it's really a way of thinking. But I'm going to show you some tips to get started with this process, following these steps just so that you can get your kids into the process of thinking in this way, because it is a shift from standard traditional schooling. You are asking them to define more of their own ideas, and that is exciting and empowering for the kids in so many ways. So I got inspired by design thinking when I first started my position as an innovation coordinator. I got the opportunity to go tour the D School in California, and you look at this picture and you think, oh, that's just an ordinary space. But it was so empowering to be in there and think about an entire place just focused on designs. Around the same time, I read the book Creative Confidence by Tom and David Kelly. And it really, really took me back to my early EMINS days as a teacher, when I went through that initial training way back when I was a fourth grade teacher. So many years ago now, but those things still are the core of my beliefs, and letting kids drive the bus and the teacher being a passenger. So we think it looks like these 5 steps that you're just going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that's what you hear people say design thinking. You think, oh, it's these 5 steps. But in reality, it looks like this. And as a teacher, you find yourself in all parts of this loop. If this was a roller coaster, this is what it can feel like sometimes, because you're all over the place, upside down, trying to help kids, trying to figure things out, trying to answer questions. And then you'll have these moments where you step back and no one in the room needs you. And that's my most favorite magical moment in teaching, is when you let them launch and you're watching and they're doing it. And that's when you know that they're really doing the driving. The beauty is in that struggle. I always say, don't throw them a life preserver and rescue them. If they're going to need to learn to swim, they're going to have to do it on their own. You can support them, but just keep going. When I first started doing this kind of learning with students, I would eat an apple while I was talking to them, because I just couldn't stop myself from giving them answers, from telling them, why don't you maybe do it this way? Or I'd see them making something and I'd think, oh, I have an idea for you. Because I get caught up in exciting ideas too. And I found that I was stealing their struggle every time. So just keep reminding yourself, don't steal their struggle. Write it on a Post-it note if you have to, and stick it somewhere where you'll see it, that it'll remind you the struggle is productive. Here is an example of a time when I step out and students are building. They're building towers out of just paper and masking tape. I'm a huge fan of what they call at the D School low-res materials, low-resolution materials. Basically, paper, toothpicks, popsicle sticks, things that you can get in bulk very inexpensively. My favorite materials to have in our space are materials that people donate and give to us. People will drop things off at the door of my classroom and be like, thought maybe the kids could design with this. I get anything from egg cartons to little strawberry crates. You just never know what's going to end up here, and you never know what kind of idea it's going to spark for a kid. The most powerful thing about design thinking to me is that the kids know that you believe in them, because you're turning it over to them and you're letting them do the thinking. If you tell them to make something and you say, build a robot and follow these steps, there's a time and a place for things like that, but they're not really getting to put their own ideas in. Whereas if you say, design a robot that will solve XYZ problems, then they're getting to put their own thought and their own opinions and their own experiences into it, which is the great part about it. And that's really when you get that strong connection between the learners, learning about each other and each other's perspectives. And it really makes it magical. I think that is the most joyful thing that can happen in a classroom. And I always say that the only thing that should be standard in a classroom is joy. A lot of times we steal their learning joy because we tell them to do it our way, or do it this way, or no, it has to be done this way. With design thinking, it's what do you think? And for some kids that can be empowering, for some it can be scary, and it can take a while to build that creative confidence up in your students if they're not used to doing this type of learning.
Could you try again?
Sorry, Siri just went off. So I have a video here that's design thinking with first grade. And this is by an awesome educator that I follow on Twitter, David Lee. And this is a really simple project that he did with his students. And I'm not going to share the video now, but I'm going to skip ahead. And I wanted you to have this to look back at so that you could see exactly what this process might look like with first graders. And then you can see what this process might look like with older kids. It's always about their ideas. And one of the things that we did in our space was we talked about embedding real world things. What's a real problem in our school that we could solve? There we go. I wanted to get to the slide. So one year I got a baby bunny and I rescued it from a pet shop. They were giving it away and students were so intrigued by him, but we were like, oh, he's going to get bigger and he's going to outgrow that cage fast. So I asked the students what would be a good habitat for him. So, instead of just drawing a cage and just moving on, we actually went through the design process and we started with empathy. Empathy is the most important step because that's the step you're connecting with your subject. What does the rabbit need? And I find that little kids connect with animals and book characters wonderfully. If you're having a hard time getting your littles to think about people other than themselves, because that's the stage they're at, having them think about animals and book characters is always a win. So they looked at our rabbit Tinker and they thought of things that he might need. And they ended up designing and coming up with these great ideas. And we built him a little rocket cage. A rocket because it's in the launch pad. You can see their drawings. They brainstormed and they came up with all kinds of plans. And the holes that are in the cage for little portholes, they said that he needs those because they don't want him to get out, but they want to be able to pet him. And then there's a little hatch door that opens that he can come out of. And, all of the research and the thought and the empathy that went into them designing this cage and then seeing it come to fruition really speaks to what this whole process is about. Yeah, the rabbit cage looks a little bit wonky. People walk in, they're like, is that a rabbit in a rocket? I always say, yes, this is what happens when you turn kids loose with their ideas. They have endless possibilities and their imaginations, they don't hold back. And what we want to do is preserve that and hopefully they won't hold back as they grow. The hardest thing to think about is how kids start to hide their imagination as they go on through school. What would the rabbit cage look like if maybe it was designed by older students or by adults? It may just be just a rectangular cage because they're not thinking about it with their imaginations and having that confidence to just design and create. I did include this little video from Brene Brown about what empathy is. When you start talking to your students about that design process, Manuel and Sadie shared some awesome empathy maps earlier that you can use to help students see the other side of things. But this is a little video that demonstrates how empathy is not looking down on somebody in a hole and throwing them a sandwich. Empathy is climbing into that hole and sitting next to them while they eat the sandwich and just being there with them. And so helping kids understand that they're not designing for others to make themselves better or to do something that they want to do just because it's fun, even though they do enjoy it. They're actually changing someone else's life, making someone else's life better, making a rabbit's life better, improving someone else. And that's the great thing. It always comes back to that empathy piece. There's a little picture of the kids enjoying Tinker's Cage as time has gone on. And that was one of the biggest things they missed this year was not having him here at school during the pandemic. But you can see a kid drew a little picture of him. And so it doesn't have to be people that kids design for. It can be any type of book characters. As I said earlier, I'm going to share a couple projects that I've done with kids to get them started in design thinking. So you might be asking yourself, the reason I came, how do I integrate this into my classroom? And I truly think it can fit into any classroom. Maybe you don't have a rabbit that you need to design a cage for. That's okay. It can fit into math. It can fit into reading, because all of these things are real world applications when kids start wanting to design and build stuff. So I have a little sample activity that we're going to do. I knew we wouldn't have a lot of time, so I wanted to give you a little tiny taste of what design thinking could look like. So I want you, on a piece of paper that you have nearby, or even on a device if you have it, I want you to make a spot for 5 areas. The 5 areas are empathy, define, ideate, prototype, and test. And I thought I would take you through each of those 5 areas just so you could see what they look like. And then after that, we're going to do a little practice, and I'll show you some different types of projects that I've done with various grade levels of students, and some of the resources that'll be in the slides that you are welcome to use with your own class. Make a copy of the slides, edit them so that they'll work for you and your students, because that's what's really the key. Just as we're having empathy and thinking about what our students need, that's part of the design process. You're designing lessons for your students, and your students might not be exactly like my students. And so I encourage you to remix any of the things that are in here. So the first step of empathy is where you think about who you're designing for, and then you define what is the problem you're going to design for. So that's where you really nail down what the problem is. And then ideate, that's the hardest step for kids the first time, in my experience. Add as many ideas as you can think of and don't stop. Kids usually want to put one idea and then they want to make it. And so I'll set a timer for 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes, and I'll force them just to talk to each other and brainstorm, or brainstorm quietly. And that always gets them going. It doesn't work immediately because they start like, I'm ready to build, I'm finished. So I'll usually tell them, here's 10 Post-its, they must all be filled, or you must have at least 20 ideas. That really pushes kids, is when you tell them they need 20 ideas or 10 ideas, depending on the age level. I wouldn't tell pre-K kids they need 20 ideas, of course, but that really pushes their thinking. And then the last 2 steps, I'm unfortunately not going to be able to do today during our Zoom call, but they are my favorite. The prototype, which is building, and the testing. So testing is when you seek feedback from your subject, or you could also say test, reflect, and repeat, because you might need to go back and do this process all over again if your subject doesn't appreciate what you've created for them, or they have a suggestion. So we're going to do the first 3 steps of empathy, define, and ideate. And I'm going to kind of cheat and give you the empathy step, because I have done 3 observations of 3 different teachers who are doing online teaching. So these are our subjects. So when we think of empathy, it could be someone that students know or someone that they don't know. It could be someone fictional. If you're designing something for Pigeon, the character from the Mo Willems books, how is that going to look different than if you design something for, say, Dr. Seuss? How is that going to be Change the Cat in the Hat? So these 3 different types of teachers. Teacher A is called Oh My Back. This teacher, his back is hurting him from leaning over his chair during Zoom. His chair has a wooden back and it makes him hunch over a little bit. Can you improve his setup? And then teacher B, I'm hungry. Her desk is crowded when she's teaching online, and she needs a place to hold her healthy snacks that won't spill on her computer. Teacher C is get moving. She doesn't want to sit at all. She prefers walking while she teaches to keep her thoughts moving, but she doesn't know how to hold her laptop and teach. So there's 3 completely different teachers, all with Zoom-tastic school year challenges. And the idea is that you pick a subject, or you can assign a subject. I could say, okay, everyone whose alphabet last name starts with A through F, you're going to do teacher A, and then so on. I'm not going to spend time on that because I want to make sure I get as much information to you as possible. But you can see we have 3 different scenarios here. Now, I have a little note on here that it would be best if you could conduct the interviews. the interview part, or making that empathy map, or having a student really connect with a subject is so powerful that it's a shame to skip it. So it, I just want to give that little disclaimer for this. This is just for demonstration purposes. Our fourth graders designed robot games for our kindergartners, and they sat with them and they interviewed them and they asked them what their interests were. And that was super powerful. Just that moment, because then they get really jazzed up to make something for this other person they've connected with. And gosh, I've never even thought more about it than this school year, and how important that human connection is, and how we've all been deprived of it for so very long, that I'm even more excited about these kind of opportunities in the fall. So just pick a teacher in your head just to practice the process. Let's say that I'm going to do teacher B, I'm hungry. So I've already done the empathy process for you, and then define what is the major problem you will design for. Well, I will create something to help another teacher with the fact that she wants to put snacks by her computer, but not have them spill on her computer when she's doing online teaching. And this part, the defining part, is it seems like it wouldn't take very long, but having the kids narrow down what they're going to do is really key. At this step, you will have kids say, I'm ready to build. I'm ready to build. They'll have an idea in their head, I guarantee it. So then we move on to the next step, the ideate. And this is where kids often want to just put one idea and move on. So if I'm really going to design something that's going to help another teacher with their snack, what is that going to look like? So I would set a timer, and I would say, okay, you're going to have 2 minutes or 10 minutes or 5 minutes, whatever you have time for. I usually find that 10 minutes is nice, because then the kids go through the process of thinking they're out of ideas and then pushing a little bit further. And you really have to work with the kids and train them to know that their first idea is not going to be their best idea. That's really hard for especially little kids, because they often think, oh, there's no way that I'm going to think of something better than this. But if they push through, they will just keep going, and they will come up with some other things. They'll also learn to build off of each other's ideas. Maybe I have an idea to make a cup that attaches to a computer monitor for the snacks to go in. And somebody else says, well, what if it wasn't a cup? What if it was a baggie, so it was more flexible on what it could hold? And then that turns into, what if it was a magnetic baggie that could attach to a magnetic thing? They could remove it and switch things out during their Zoom calls. And those ideas just keep evolving and keep going. And some kids will want that one right answer. And there's no one right answer to this. Design is a constantly evolving. Things get better and better. And that's what makes it such a powerful process for deep thinking. So the timer goes off, and you have your sheet full of ideas, and then it's time to build. Now, this is students' absolute favorite in my classroom. They love to build, and we could spend days building. So I always find we need a timer. It needs to be a quick process, not super quick, but quick enough where we're going to get back to the testing part. The first time I did a lot of design work with kids, I would let them build, and it would go on for days, and I would be like, they're never finished. And I realized there's no end. So I did have a project that went on for like 6 weeks, way too long. And they never really did anything with those. And by the time they ended up building them, because they had changed their idea so much, we really lost part of the process. So using those timers helps if you're someone like me who needs that structure to say, okay, when the timer goes off, you've got to get your item tested by the other person. So you take your materials and they build. And like I said, we like low-res materials, very simple things that kids can build with. Foil is really popular. There's something about the excitement of having a table full of materials. I don't care if you're 4 or 24 or 64. It's exciting when you have an idea. Oh, I'm going to build this magnetic food holder for a laptop that's going to make someone else's life better. It's such a silly little thing, but it gets very exciting and very fun for the kids to do. And then you can't leave out that test, reflect, repeat part, because that's where kids get feedback, where they dig deeper in the empathy. The fourth graders that made the robot games, they actually took their games to the kindergartners, and the kindergartners used their B-bots to play the games, and then they got feedback. And so we had another round, and the kids were able to say things like, oh, I realized my game didn't have enough rules, or my game had too many rules, there was no way to win. And they're really able to evaluate their own work, and that's where the deep thinking really is. It's in that evaluation of what they've done, and that person or people that they've connected with makes it really powerful. And you'll find that kids will tell you how hard it was, and they will love it. And that's one of my favorite things about it, is they're doing work that's so hard, but they love it so much. They're so motivated because they're doing something that's real. Now, as far as the rest of the slides go, I have included a whole slew of activities for you to take back to your classroom, and I'm going to quickly just kind of give an overview of them, so that you will have some activities to give some of these challenges a try with your kids. This is an example of a kindergarten lesson that I did. This was a teacher that was nervous about trying design thinking, so I created this little kindergarten pizza activity. And this is just an activity, so it's not, it's not like going to be like groundbreaking design work or anything like that, but it will help start to release the control in the classroom, whether it's you or another teacher that you're trying to support. This is a pizza that a child designed for Pigeon. It has hot dogs and buses on it. We were also working on fractions at the time. A lot of the work I do in my classroom is integrated with stuff they're doing in the regular classroom. So, they were like, we're working on fractions. And I was like, oh, here's a chance for a design activity. And this was just a one class period activity just to start getting kids into the idea of what does it mean to start designing with empathy? What does Pigeon like? So the next year when they come in first grade, I say, remember last year we designed for Pigeon. Now we're going to be designing for a leprechaun, or whatever the character or person may be. I put some samples in here. You're welcome to print and use those. And I have a little video of kids actually doing their design work, talking about their pizzas, and they never understood fractions better than when they wanted their pizza to be perfect. The second one that I have is a leprechaun design challenge. And that is for students in first grade we did, but you can use any grade level. We had a little blog that they would read about the leprechaun, and Luck would leave these notes on his blog, like that he had a ladybug named Lucinda, and that his favorite color was orange, and that he really liked certain types of cereal. And kids would read that, and then they would come in and they would design his trap and try to catch him. And they would take things that they learned about him in the blog, and they would incorporate them into his trap. And we created the Leprechaun Scene Investigations Unit, where we would try to figure out how to trap the leprechaun. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. This is just pictures that other schools shared their trap creations with us, and it was another way for us to connect the project with others. That was a lot of fun. And this, and one more, students had to create an animal to live in a whole new galaxy. And there were 3 different roles in the group. I love giving kids roles to play so that they can make sure everyone is kind of not just pulling their weight, but supporting each other and giving them that good collaboration practice. So this was just a fictitious planet, and I have all the little descriptions in here. They would get this description, and they would have to design an animal that could live on that planet. And they would go absolutely crazy digging in our bins of like recycled items, trying to make their animal. And I have a picture of a girl that created one. Skipping ahead. Oops, sorry, I went too far. There it is. She created this little giraffe, and you can see like her face. I was like, this is why I do it. Like their little afterglow that they have when they've created something that they're proud of is my favorite absolute part. All right, and I'll just finish with this last activity. I created these character cards, and I do have a link for them in the presentation that you can use to get started with your students. These cards will allow you to give kids a profile. For example, Pigeon, he has trouble making big decisions. He loves hot dogs. He enjoys driving a bus. And then they design for that character. And it's a super fun way to get kids started thinking about making stuff for others. That was the fastest 30 minutes ever.
I know, it flies by. Thank you so much, Chrissy. Such great ideas. I loved the comment Mary Beth made on Attendify. She said she's excited to see the activities and that part of the struggle, that there's some challenge there for students, and that's where they can solve real life problems. And so just thank you. And
Thank you.
If there's any questions or other comments, feel free to stick them there in Attendify.
Yeah, I knew there'd be no way to get through everything, but I really wanted people to have the items they could look at that might spark an idea for a project they have going on in their school. I don't think I've ever been more excited to get back to this type of learning as I am for next year.
Exactly. And our students are so hungry for it.
Yes.
All right. It was great to meet you. Thank you all.
Thanks, Jamie.
Thank you for joining this session. To request a certificate of attendance, you can access the link at the bottom of the session description, scan the QR code here, or go to bit.ly/I2 certificate. Bit.ly shorteners are case sensitive, so please be sure to use all uppercase letters. Hear what insight other I2 attendees and presenters might have on this session and other breakout sessions by connecting with the Innovation Institute community on Facebook or Twitter at I2 Estale or in Attendify's interactive features. And don't forget to mark your calendar for June 8th and 9th to join us for I2 2022. Thank you.